Hey there. I'm excited to announce this to you today. This is what you've been waiting for in your spiritual quest. This is something I've wanted to do for a long time, and I'm finally ready to announce it that it's ready to go. It's the Grief to Growth Community Circle. Now, this is a sanctuary where like-minded souls are united in their journey through grief and towards personal transformation. It's more than just a place. It's a beginning. It's a commitment to growth and understanding. Here you're finding not just a community, but you're entering a circle of trust and depth. You're going to engage with interactive coursework. You'll dive into exclusive podcast episodes and partake in discussions that illuminate the path from mourning to empowerment. This is a realm where every question is honored and every individual's journey is validated. To be part of this exclusive circle, visit us at grieftogrowth.com/community or look for the chat icon at the bottom of every page on the main website. Remember that entry is a privilege because I want to ensure that every member is as dedicated and genuine as you are. You must apply to join, but the journey within is worth every step. So go ahead and join us today. Check it out, grieftogrowth.com/community, and I look forward to seeing you there.
Hi there. Welcome to Grief to Growth Podcast. Your host is Brian Smith, spiritual seeker, best-selling author, grief survivor, and life coach. Brian believes that the worst tragedies of life provide the greatest opportunity for growth. Brian says he was planted, not buried, and he is here to help you grow where you've been planted by the difficulties in life. In each episode, Brian and his guests will share what has helped them to survive and thrive. It is his sincere hope this episode helps you today.
Hey, everybody, this is Brian back with another episode of Grief to Growth. And I have to say, before we get started, if you are watching this, then you notice I'm wearing sunglasses today. I'm dealing with an eye infection. The lights are hurting my eyes, and it's kind of not great to look at. So that's why I'm wearing sunglasses. I'm not trying to be cool or anything. But I've got with me today Cathy Jensen. And as you're going to find out in a few moments, Cathy has a fascinating mind. She's really interesting to talk to. We did a pre-interview a little while ago. I've read her book, Finding Aaron, which is a spiritual practice beyond belief. It's an incredible book. So we're going to get through as much as we can today. I know we have a lot to talk about. Let me just read a brief bio on Cathy, and then I'll bring her in. Cathy has a master's degree in theoretical linguistics. She taught at the University of Iowa, which is the Hawkeyes to us football fans. I'm a big fellow Big Ten person, Ohio State. She taught in the linguistics department at English as a second language program. She was awarded a Fulbright Lecturer Award to teach at the University of the Andes in the linguistics department in Merida, Venezuela. So she was in Venezuela for several years. And is that where you met your husband, Cathy?
No, I actually met him in Iowa City when he was doing his master's degree.
Okay, so but you guys moved to Venezuela together. So she lived in Venezuela for quite a bit of time. She opened the Iowa Institute Language Academy in Venezuela. She taught English and Spanish. She moved from Venezuela to Spain, and Cathy has a son, Aaron, who is in spirit now. We're going to be talking about Aaron because Aaron is the inspiration for the book. So I want to just get a little bit of background on you, Cathy, but welcome to Grief to Growth.
Thank you very, very much, Brian. I'm happy to be here.
Yeah, as I said, I think I know people are going to find out very soon. You've got a very interesting mind. And we talked before, and I think we're kindred spirits in the fact that we both feel like we're here to teach and to really kind of help people out. So tell us about your journey, how you got from Iowa to Venezuela to Spain, and also tell us about Aaron.
Okay, well, we'll start with Aaron. I had Aaron in Des Moines, Iowa. I was very young, 17 years old. His father, Joe Schaeffer, who is in spirit also, we didn't stay together very long. We were very young. And when Aaron was about 8, we went to this wedding, and Aaron struck up this friendship with Alejo Sanchez. And they decided to go bowling and this and that. So Alejo came into our lives when Aaron was about 8 or 9, and he is from Spain, but he had lived in Venezuela for a very long time. He was a professor at the University of Los Andes, and he was in Iowa doing his master's degree. So Alejo and I then got together. That's actually what prompted me to go into linguistics, was learning about teaching English as a second or foreign language. And So that I did that. I got my master's. Aaron and I moved to Venezuela. And then Alejo had made the promise that when he went to do his PhD, he would come back to Iowa, which in fact is what he did. So we came back to Iowa. Aaron went back to City High School with all of his friends and this and that. And then Alejo got his PhD, was back in Venezuela, and I got a Fulbright to teach at the school there at the university. Mm-hmm. So, okay, everything's fine. We have, still have, but now it's totally different, a beautiful farm in the Andes with peacocks and guinea hens and ducks and geese and cows. And we had our own cheese. We made our own cheese and, kind of idyllic. And I opened up the school. I left the university, opened up the school, the Iowa Institute. Mm-hmm. And Aaron met Candy Castillo. He worked cable. So he would work in the States for 6 months, and then he'd come to Venezuela for 6 months. So as an adult, we had the unusual and wonderful opportunity to spend lots and lots of time together. That was about 8 or 9 years, where he's 6 months in Venezuela, 6 months in the States. He and Candy got married. Venezuela was then falling apart, and we knew we needed to make some changes. My mother-in-law was there in Venezuela, so it was difficult to decide what to do. Mm-hmm. Then Aaron moved to Spain, invited us to go. I went, had a beautiful, beautiful time with Aaron, had all of our plans made. He was going to come to Venezuela, do teacher training. Then we were going to open a school in Spain. So I left from that beautiful trip. I was there for 2 months, during which time, Brian, he told me twice he thought he was going to die before I did. And at the time, of course, I just basically told him to don't ever say that again. Right. And that when you get to
What age was he at this time?
37.
Okay.
Yeah. So we had all of our plans made. I left on June 3rd, came back to Venezuela. So we knew we were going to, try to sell a farm. And Alejo was retired by then, and he was thinking to move his pension to Spain and blah, blah, blah. So Aaron had a little house that I had helped him buy. Some guy called me. I went back June 3rd to Venezuela. Some guy out of the blue called me and said, this little house over here, would you be interested in selling it? So I met that guy. Aaron was very interested in selling it. I met him. He decided he wanted to buy the house. He did made arrangements for the money transfer. Mm-hmm. And I said, maybe we should sign a paper. And he told me, he said, I really wouldn't think I needed to, except my best friend just died 5 days ago of a heart attack. So on June 28th, we signed this paper. He's buying the house. And on July 2nd, Aaron passed, just out of the blue. So as you know, and parents listening, and people who have loved someone so much and they die so suddenly. Anyway, I couldn't believe it. I was in shock and all that kind of stuff. And I wanted to die for a long, long time. Mm-hmm. Then on July 8th, just 6 days after Aaron had passed, so we were in a place called Puerto La Cruz. We had a lot of stuff, Alejo and I. We, financially very successful. We were getting ready to go to Spain, which took me a long time to be able to even go on the airplane. But then on July 8th at 2:30 in the morning, I wasn't really asleep, but then all of a sudden I was wide awake, Brian, and it was like this incredible feeling of joy. I mean, it was joy. It like ran through my body. And I was so shocked that I just got this recorder, and it was like I heard these words, or I felt them, and it was that everything was okay. Aaron is okay. Everything was fine. And in the words I heard, I'm a good mom for Aaron, that I had listened to his ideas, that I had paid attention to them, and that to be patient with myself, that patience is my virtue. Okay, then that was huge. I made a promise, and I said, okay, Aaron, no matter what, I'm going to find you. No matter what, I'm going to find you. And I wrote it down, and I laminated it, and I carried it with me. And when I would be falling into that despair, I'd bring it back out because I couldn't understand where that feeling came from. I couldn't figure out what had happened, but it had happened. Mm-hmm. It had happened. Mm-hmm. And so and then I started keeping track of everything. And that's what initiated this quest of finding Aaron. And that's where the book comes from too. The book, was 5 years in the making. Mm-hmm. It was a very difficult to write book in the sense that I had so many beliefs about death that I didn't know that I had. And that's what I hope that people who do read the book, I would like to say it is so important to become aware of what you believe about death, but don't even know that you believe it. Yeah. That's the gist of it.
And that is a very, very important point that I want to kind of bring out. So what were some of the beliefs you had about death that you didn't even know that you had?
Okay, well, I have, there's two main myth makers or model makers is a better word in Western society. One is science, for about 400 years or so, science. And the other one is the church. And even those like me, I was raised Catholic, Irish Catholic, who's, very open to saints and this and that. But I was not in any way, shape or form a serious Catholic, let's say. Mm-hmm. But yet I had this, so many people would tell me things like, for example, the book is self-published. And when I went in to talk to the people about publishing it, the previous owner of the publishing place, he said, I'd like to make a copy of the back of the book. And I was just like so pleased, thinking, oh my goodness, it's made an impression. Mm-hmm. And he came back in and he handed it to him and he goes, it's forbidden to collaborate or even to communicate with the dead. It's forbidden in the Bible. Mm-hmm. So on what we call, the religious side, our culture has all of these ingrained ideas that unless you're highly motivated, you don't go through those beliefs. You just kind of have them. Right. They determine your reactions to things. And then the other one, of course, is the last 400 years of science. So my main block is Newtonian classic physics model, or material realism is what I call it in the book. Mm-hmm. That idea is way deep down inside, even if we don't know that we think this, most of us do, that everything comes from matter. That matter is, and that's why, they keep looking for the tiniest part of matter, thinking if they find it, they're going to find out how it became conscious. Right. So I had an incredible amount of experiences. Like Aaron has never given up. And other people, my father-in-law, that we had experiences before that I wrote down just because they were so unusual. I wrote everything down, but then I kind of forgot about it until my dad died, and then Aaron. And so I just remember struggling. It was so horrible. I would have this message or a symbol of eternity, really. And I would be so sure and so enthusiastic and so certain I'd never doubt. But then I would start doubting. I would say, but how? How could Aaron move matter? How could this? Well, all of that doubt is tied into this belief that I didn't know that I had, that basically it narrows down to the brain produces consciousness. Right. So if you have that idea that the brain produces consciousness, well, without a brain, there's absolutely no survival of consciousness. It's just not there. So, and I remember the day I was in Spain. I remember the day, and I must have read it, I don't know, probably 100 times in so many different books. But finally that day it got in, and I just remember like, oh my God, this is the problem. Yeah.
Stay with us. We'll be right back.
Hey there, something I want to tell you about today. My podcast platform, Buzzsprout, has recently made it easier for me to allow you to support me financially. Go to www.grieftogrowth.com/subscribe. That's growth2growth.com/subscribe. And once you're there, you can sign up to support me financially. Now, you can do it for as little as $3 a month, or of course, as much as you'd like. If you do that, you'll get access to bonus episodes, and you'll see those in the regular feed. They'll have a lock on them. But when you become a subscriber, you'll actually get access to your own private feed, and you'll be able to listen to the regular podcast along with the bonus podcast for the subscribers. I want to thank you for listening. I want to thank you for sharing the podcast. And I want to thank those of you who support me financially. Have a great day, and on to the episode.
Yeah, Cathy, I love the way you put that. I think it's brilliant because we have these two pillars of knowledge in our society, and it's the religion, which binds us in certain ways, but because it keeps us from believing certain things, like our loved ones can still be with us, we can communicate. And then we got the materialism that we're all steeped in, which tells us that your religion is just wishful thinking. Right. So we even though we think we believe, we always have this underlying doubt, right? And,
right.
Yeah, and I think you and I are very similar because I asked the question too. How does Shayna do this? How does she make a song come on the radio? How does this work? And that's that Western mindset.
Right. And you know what? I think for religious people, that's the most, the easiest belief to get acquainted with and work your way out of it is the science one. Because you start reading about, Max Planck and all of these physicists who absolutely say that material realism is just a theory. It's just a theory. And we've absorbed it as a fact. Well, inside of that theory, anything that can't be reproduced in a lab repeatedly, is not data for investigation. Right. So they just can't investigate it. But religion, most of our Western religions have absorbed that belief. It's deep down inside of the very religious, so they don't want to investigate because they're afraid that their belief is not really true. But in fact, it is true. Right. So if people will be courageous enough, because it takes a certain kind of courage, and it takes a certain sort of motivation also, to really get familiar with the ideas and the truth behind your religion, which is what Thomas Aquinas did, which I found that a fascinating research area, that he tried very hard to take the beliefs and research them and find the truth in them in a way that we can understand, rationally. So then the fear factor goes away also. If you start to understand all of these different things that are happening, well, let me say this. In Joseph Campbell's model, there's a spiritual hero, and there's two sorts of ways a person goes on this quest, a quest for spiritual knowledge. So he said, a spiritual hero is a person who's found or learned a mode of experiencing the supernormal realm of human spiritual life. Okay, so a mode of experiencing the supernormal range of human spiritual life. There's two ways you do it. One, you're born with this deep desire to know, and there's, nothing's going to stop you. And the other one is something is stolen, and you go to get it back. So for parents, particularly, it seems to me there is no group with more motivation than parents whose children have been stolen. Yeah.
That's so well put. And I hadn't really thought of it that way before, because, you titled the book Finding Aaron, and so many parents I've seen have written books, and it's always finding, because we feel like we've lost something, and that's the thing that kickstarts us. That's the thing that just kicks us in the butt and says, I can't do this anymore. And what I also love about what you just said, you mentioned the word fear, and there's fear on both sides. I've seen fear from the materialists, that they don't want to admit that religion might be true. And I've seen a lot of fear from people who are religious that say, well, science is going to disprove my beliefs, so therefore I can't become scientific.
Right. And in fact, it's the opposite. In Einstein, there's a quote attributed to Einstein where he said, the only truly religious people in a materialistic age, materialistic in the sense of a model that's based on material realism, where
Right.
if it's not repeatable, if it can't be observed by everybody, it's not data for investigation. He said, the only really religious people are the serious scientists. And, you look at the Big Bang, that's, one of the main contributors is a priest. And you look at that Chardin, that Tilliard de Chardin, a paleontologist, he's a Jesuit priest. And so many, in Kepler and Copernicus and all the early scientists, when science had just started veering off from religion,
Right.
Those guys were deeply, deeply religious. And I think interesting about the word religion is, I read in something from Carl Jung, he says the real meaning of religion comes from religere, something like that, and it means to take careful and serious account of the numinous, to fully integrate it into your life.
Yeah.
Huh?
It's really interesting that, and for people that don't, and you and I both have this scientific type of bent, and so people might be getting a little bit lost here. But the thing is, science and religion were all one body of knowledge up until, as you said, about 400 years ago,
Right.
when science took a left turn and said that everything's got to be observable, repeatable, and if not, it doesn't exist. And they couldn't study consciousness. So and they've got people now that tie themselves so much up in knots that they say that consciousness is an illusion. So you talked about material realism, and the other side of that coin is idealism. And so you might want to explain to people what that actually means.
Well, I'd like to, if I may,
Yeah.
I'd like to go into this so-called split.
Mm-hmm.
So there was very, very, very religious people who were learning that, for example, the earth was not the center of the universe.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so we have this very famous meeting of Galileo demonstrating his telescopes to the religious folks. And, he was under a lot of pressure. And everyone would be afraid to publish if what you published could get you killed. So he was very careful. And one of his quotes is like, I'm assuming that this God who gave me the ability to think and investigate wants me to use those abilities.
Mm-hmm.
So he's at the meeting, and he writes to his friend Johann Kepler, and he says they won't look through the telescope. They won't even look.
Yeah.
So anyway, and we have this happening with Descartes in 1500 something, where he's camped with the French army near Ulm, Germany, which is where Einstein was born later. But so he has this dream where an angel of truth comes to him and says, the conquest of nature is to be done through measurement and number.
Hmm.
So he, of course, was extremely well equipped to do that. He's the father of so many things, different numerical methods and this and that. So what kind of was a compromise, because to publish scientific material could get you executed. This split was made where they said, okay, we're going to look at the world of matter. We're just talking about the world of matter.
Mm-hmm.
The spirit stuff is staying over here with the church.
Mm-hmm.
So the church could then have, a field of expertise. And it was just a compromise. It was
Right.
a compromise of dividing a reality into two fields of investigation.
Right.
But then that compromise kind of morphed into this belief that there really was two separate realms, spirit and matter.
Mm-hmm.
And then that further morphed into this idea by material realists now that say, well, the only world that's real is the world of matter.
Stay with us. We'll be right back.
Hi there, I'm really excited to tell you about my latest ebook. It's 4 lessons that you can learn from the near-death experience without going through all the trouble of dying to learn them. I've been studying NDEs for several years now. I am completely convinced that not only are they 100% real, but that there's some very universal wisdom that we can get from the near-death experience. And I've distilled that down in this book into 4 short lessons. And I've also given you all the reasons why I believe that NDEs are absolutely real. So go to www.grieftogrowth.com/NDE lessons to pick it up for free. www.growth.com/NDE lessons. I hope you enjoy it.
Yeah. And that's a very, very important history for people to understand, is that because that's what happened. And you put it exactly right. It was like a compromise. And they said, we're going to put science over here. We'll do our thing. Religion, you go over here and you do your thing. But they still respected each other. They existed. But then the materialists said, well, now you don't even exist anymore. You guys are studying something that's just meaningless. And I just want to throw this story in here because this happened to me just a couple of days ago. We were talking about one of my groups, the spiritual thing. We're talking about soul planning or life planning. And this person said, I've got enough evidence that I know that this is real. She said, but I don't know that it's really proof. And I said to her, that is coming from that mindset that has told you that the only thing that matters is what's repeatable, that can be done in a lab, and that your experience is meaningless. And we've gotten to the point now where not only do we not trust other people's experiences, we don't even trust our own.
Right. Because, there's a book that's it helped me a lot. It's by Charles Tart. And I don't remember the title of it offhand, but inside of there, it's in the book though. Mm-hmm. It's Pathologies to Knowing and Learning. And he says in there that our deeply absorbed and unexamined beliefs that guide everything we experience, that we unconsciously defend those unconscious beliefs. And the one example he one of them, he has many very beautiful worded defense strategies. And one of the strategies is to start to question the experiencer. Mm-hmm. Like you start to say, well, she's pretty messed up over Aaron's death. And, she got into this really weird stuff when Aaron died. And, and so you dismiss the person giving the evidence. But what I did was I dismissed myself,
right.
And that's what she's doing too. She's
right.
like,
we do. We do. We say, well, I must be just grieving. I didn't really experience that. And the thing about your book, I mean, before we got on, you mentioned that your book is almost like a textbook. And I can see why it took you 5 years to write it, because it is so detailed. And you can tell audience, listening to Cathy, she's read all these scientists. She knows the history. And then she also catalogs her own experience in great detail when you were going through like the dates. I mean, the dates and you've taken pictures and you've got notes so that you can't even go back and question your own experience because you've documented it. And I really wish I had done that. And I say to other people that have lost people, do that, write it down, document these things, because as I'm reading your book, I'm like, wow, this is just amazing. But we tend to forget things and we tend to start to dismiss them.
Right. And not only that, one of the reasons I have done a revision is during this 2 years of COVID, I've spent that time studying, and there were some more things I wanted to add, and I'm far more confident now about adding those. And one of them is more of a model about the evolution of consciousness, just a model, there's many, but a model. And in this model, it talks about one of the components for changing our minds. It's not our beliefs, but actually changing our mode of experiencing. So if you remember Campbell's words, our mode of experiencing is to pay very close attention to things that seem disconnected, but feel connected. Mm-hmm. And you start writing it down and something changes in you. And Leibniz, who's in the book also, I use his quote because he says, notation eases the labor of the mind. Yeah. And it's not only for not forgetting, it's somehow the physical act of writing things down changes your mode of experiencing, slowly but surely it opens up. It's like it opens up new views, but actually literally.
Yeah. And you document a lot of synchronicities, in the book. And I know Gary Schwartz, who I do some work with, he's fascinated by synchronicity. He's got a brilliant mind. And so, since I've been working with Gary, I've been open more to synchronicities. And you're absolutely right. It changes the way you view the world from this Newtonian cause and effect, where I have to figure out why this happened or that happened. And these two things are unrelated. Therefore, it must be coincidence. To you get to the point where it's like you start to expect it and you start to look for it. And the world looks completely different.
Right. In synchronicity, that was there are three big things in the revision. Synchronicity is one of them, because I, just speaking for myself, I used that word for many years, but I didn't understand really what I was talking about. And of course, there's always so much more to learn, but at this point of understanding, which is further along than I was, so synchronicity, it turns out, the huge thing about synchronicity was how the model material realism, it has this causal model where everything happens because of matter in motion. So they always use that famous example of the billiard balls, like you hit one ball, it hits another. And so an event manifests, and behind that are all these movements of matter bumping into each other, even our thoughts, everything according to this model. But what Carl Hume's huge contribution with synchronicity is, he says it doesn't have to be matter upon matter. The mechanism for the manifestation of the event into the material world, an objective event, can be meaning. Meaning, so that two minds, two psychics, working with these material objects, that is the mechanism for those events to manifest. And once you start to think about that, well, psyches certainly do not have to have a body to work. So if you think about it in relation to our quest, finding our kids and understanding death, you have two psyches, mine and Aaron. Yeah. And together, these events manifest into the objective world, which, this is the key point. If you don't participate, you can't be a recipient. You have to be a participant to be a recipient. And it's not the idea, well, I just have to believe it. That's not it. You have to participate in the manifestation of that hierophany or opening door event, or whatever you want to call that event that is not explained by matter moving upon matter.
We'll get back to Grief to Growth in just a few seconds. Did you know that Brian is an author and a life coach? If you're grieving or know someone who is grieving, his book, Grief to Growth, is a best-selling, easy-to-read book that might help you or someone you know. People work with Brian as a life coach to break through barriers and live their best lives. You can find out more about Brian and what he offers at www.grieftogrowth.com, www.growth.com. If you'd like to support this podcast, visit www.patreon.com/grieftogrowth, www.patreon.com/GRIEF, to make a financial contribution. And now, back to Grief to Growth.
Yeah, that was a point I took out of your book that really resonated with me and really made a lot of sense, because again, we still have this mindset of the billiard balls, right? And people will say, well, if you give me all the conditions, I can tell you what's going to happen next. Right. And you are just a biological robot. You are, you think you have free will, you think you can choose your thoughts, but you really can't. It's all a matter of chemistry. It's a matter of DNA. It's a matter of what happened to you in the past. And all those inputs, come to this point. But like you said, what Jung said was like, no, it's not that. That's the mindset. There's only material, but there is the spiritual, as we want to call it. And I say to people through my studies, I don't like the word supernatural because there is no supernatural.
Right.
It's only what we can't explain yet.
Right.
It's not all matter. It's not all physical, but there's this consciousness that we cannot explain yet. And we call that supernatural. And people say, I don't believe in that woo-woo stuff.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, that's your first warning. I mean, not warning. It's your first gift that your pathologies to knowing and learning are rearing up. You know, when you see yourself, I don't believe in that. That's your first, it's your unconscious defense against information that goes against your core beliefs. You know, and it's scary. It's scary to think that your core beliefs, you don't know what they are. You don't really know what they are unless you've investigated them. And that's why, you know, we can't talk about politics and religion because they're based on belief systems, and people don't, unless they're highly motivated, you know, which I think many of us are. You don't go beyond the beliefs. You just kind of go through life with these beliefs you've absorbed from your community, kind of, you know, going along there, and you won't question it until something happens when those beliefs no longer will do. They're like such a precarious vehicle. But belief is just so fragile a vehicle to carry us through life. It's belief's not the answer, you know, it's the problem.
Well, yes. And it's interesting. You said earlier that some people seem to be born with this gnawing that you have to know more. And I was born like that. So I always questioned everything, but I still had to have that precipitating event of Shayna's passing that just really kicked it into hyperdrive. Before that, it was a hobby. It was like, I need to know. It's like, you know, there's something wrong. And I see this again with so many parents, and you said beliefs is such a precarious thing, and it is, because I've seen on the other hand, like people, I think of a great friend who, evangelical Christian, believed in the Bible, literal belief, you know, member of the staff of the church and all that stuff. And then one day when it just occurred to him that, you know, Noah didn't put all these animals on the ark, or, you know, there wasn't a talking snake or whatever it was, then he went to the other extreme because now his beliefs were shattered. And then he had no more belief. So now he's a materialistic atheist. It's like, therefore, all this stuff is garbage. And I've realized, and I love the title of your book, A Spiritual Practice Beyond Belief, because that has double meaning, right? It's beyond what we can believe, but it's like, you don't just believe it. And you and I talked about this when we did the pre-interview. You don't believe this. You know this. You're investigating it.
Right. And then the most important thing I think that I've come to realize is that, you know, we can't have any final model of any final truth, because the thing that we're investigating, consciousness or spirit, is what we are. And as we investigate, we evolve, but so does what we are seeking. I mean, so, you know, there's a beautiful quote by Houston Smith, and it goes, "The only unqualifiedly good is extension of vision and enlargement of understanding." And it seems like if that's our goal, like your friend, well, in our work, and it really is a mission, we have a lot of banners and things that say bridging the gap between belief and knowledge. So your friend probably, hopefully, you know, will go on that bridge because it's built by science and religion. I mean, those two, they're questing for the same information. The same quest is to expand our knowledge, our understanding of what we call reality. And so I feel bad for your friend. My husband always told me that too. He said, no, but if I, you know, destroy someone's belief, then they're left with nothing. So that's not the idea. Right.
Yeah. We want to help people explore. And we want to help people realize it's not an either or proposition. It's not either you are scientists, you know, to use that term, which science is a method. It's not a conclusion. But either you're scientific or you're religious. And it's not, and I would say I am scientific, but I know the science can only go so far. And I don't limit my experience based upon what science tells me. And you know, the thing is, science has done a really good job, our society, of burying the truth. Like, you know, you talk about Einstein and Planck and Bohr and Heisenberg and all these guys who believed in the spiritual world. And science was first founded because people believed in a God, and they believed in an orderly universe. And they said that the way to study this God, the way to get to know this God, is to study his creation.
Sure. Yeah.
So
and it's not, and those guys didn't believe it. They knew it. See, that's what I did. When I was doing my research, I made this big, long list, and I updated it all the time of all these incredibly, smart people. And I would they believed in it. They believed in it. They believed in it. But no, of course they didn't believe it. They knew it.
Yeah. In fact, Einstein discovered a few things, like when he's, quantum mechanics, he's like, I don't like this. I don't like the idea that, but he finally came to the conclusion, it has to be real because the evidence shows me that it's real.
Right. And you know what I think? If there's also Viktor Frankl, he says in there, so the man who lost, really everything in Nazi concentration camps, and he says in his book, he says, it's not our task to just accept that the world is meaningless. Our task is to accept that we cannot understand the unconditional meaningfulness of life in rational terms. So a man who lost everything, he says the unconditional meaningfulness of life. But the thing that stuck to me was that rational terms. And so what Finding Aaron, I realize now, what it attempts to do is to show people that by using your brain, which God gave you, which consciousness evolved, by using it, you can study and learn your way out of fear. You don't have to be afraid that you're somehow insulting God by wanting to learn more. And you don't have to be afraid that you're falling for some sort of malarkey. Yeah. Because science really says you investigate all data.
Right.
It's only this latest model, which we've already worked out of, it's just that, I didn't know it, but you can only accept data that falls within these very narrow parameters. Yeah. But once you realize that that's not science, that's pseudoscience. Science investigates all data. Yeah. And which is what's happening now.
And that's a really good point you made there too, because science kind of closed down some of the scientific community. I don't like to keep, because science is, again, it's a method.
Yeah.
So some people, materialists, said we can't investigate that because it doesn't exist, because it's impossible. And I've told this story before. I was talking to someone that said there's no evidence for any of the stuff you believe, and I said, well, read Dr. Julie Beischel's work on mediumship, read Gary Schwartz's work on mediumship. Read Penny Sartori's work on near-death experiences. And he comes back to me and says, well, that's about mediumship. That doesn't exist, so therefore I'm not going to read it. And I said, that's not a very scientific approach. A scientist would put a medium in a situation and control and say, let's see if there's anything to this. And that's been done. Right.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So it's just... Cathy, I'd like for you to talk about some, because we've talked a lot about the science and the philosophy in your book, which is all great, but talk about some of the experiences that you outline in the book, because those are also just as fascinating.
Okay, well, first of all, things started, this idea I have in the book called claiming a number. Okay, well, I'll just go with some of the major experiences, let's say. So if Aaron passed, and we go to Spain, and then we go to Des Moines, Iowa, to have a funeral service here. And a lot of us stayed at his grandma Schaeffer's home. And he had a Land Rover, and we had the car parked in Joanne Schaeffer's driveway. And this is after the service. And Alejo was outside, and I came out, and all of a sudden Aaron's car started. And so Alejo had his keys in his pocket, and he thought, okay, well, he has a remote starter. So then Candy came out, and being from Venezuela, he tells her, oh my gosh, it gets so cold in Iowa, Aaron has a remote starter. And he took that little fob thing, and he pressed the two buttons, and the car started up. So then he got inside, and he put the key in and had to turn it on and then off. And then 5 minutes later, my sister Christy came out, and he said, hey, look, Aaron has a remote starter. And the same exact thing, the car started. So then 3 days later, we're having this farewell dinner for Candy, who's going back to Spain. And I was telling the story, and my sister-in-law, Debbie, whose family has a business where they install like speakers and remote starters and all these things. She said, well, let me see the fob. And she looks at it and she goes, there's no remote starter on this. But so then, it kind of hit me, but not really.
Mm-hmm.
Not really. So then we go out to Washington State to stay with my sister, Ellen. Then the fob like kind of starts vibrating. And well, we don't really pay attention either. And the lighthouse said, hey, look, you guys, Aaron has a remote starter. And he goes, dun-dun, and it didn't work. And I was reading at the same time a book about a girl who went to her father's grave and his car started spontaneously.
Mm-hmm.
I said, you know what, maybe. So we go and we check the battery. No, it's not that. We get back to Des Moines. I immediately go to this Land Rover dealership who had done a pre-trip check on the car because it had been sitting for a year and we were driving to Washington State. And all I said was, you guys accidentally disconnected the remote starter when you did the check. He said, okay. Then he comes back in, he goes, well, I need the fob with the remote starter. And I said, that's the only fob we have. He goes, well, it doesn't have a remote starter. And then I started bawling, but my sister-in-law, Kim, she had come into that because she knew it was important. So she told him what happened. They went and they checked the car out. It took about an hour. Then they came back in and they said, okay, well, we're going to check again, okay? Said, okay. They checked again. He came out and he said, there's no way the car started by itself. There's no way that, it must have been a ghost. And then I just was in shock. And Kim said, yeah, that's what we think. Well, the same car, Brian, a month later, for Aaron's birthday on November 3rd, I decided to have it detailed. So I take it into Casey's Car Wash in Fort Collins, Colorado. I go around, crying every place. And this really nice kid in Spanish invites me to meet his aunt and all this. I get back to the car wash and I say, well, you didn't do such a hot job. And the kid said, yeah, you're right. We'll do it again. So they're going to go run it through again. And I walk off. But when I come back, the owner's there and he said, oh, I'm so sorry. We had an accident with your car. Then I fall to the floor and say, I didn't take care of the car and this and that. Mm-hmm. But then he tells me this. He said, I don't know why we started the engine. We never start the engine unless we're going to clean the motor. Mm-hmm. And it was on some kind of a conveyor belt. That car somehow moved and hit the car in front of it. Mm. And he goes, we're going to have to get you a new bumper. And the only thing that was wrong with that Land Rover was it had a nick in the front bumper, but it was like $1,600 and we weren't going to do it, He goes, we'll have to get you a new bumper. So I called my sister Ellen, like, oh my God, Aaron's car. And she goes, oh, he got a new bumper for his birthday. Oh, wow. But then the guy who owned the car wash, he said he'd been working there since he was 12 and he was about 50 or so then. Mm-hmm. He said he'd never, ever, ever, ever seen that ever in his whole entire life. Those things don't happen. So Candy, who's an engineer by her studies, when she came to the States, we went to check to make sure that somehow it couldn't have been moved along. The guy's like, no, there's no way. He said, I've been here. And she looked at the conveyor belt and all this. So those are two, quite in your face experiences and things like that. There's a lot of small things that happen with numbers. There's a lot of huge things. Like one time in Elche, in Spain, I was standing in front of this shop that had a lot of candles and some woman came up to me and said, did you have a child who died? I see a kid standing beside you. I mean, I had things like that you just, and of course the importance of documenting everything, because not only did I document, I then started to take the pictures I took of everything. Somehow it felt like a mission. I mean, all of these things happened and it kept feeling like a mission that Aaron and I were supposed to do this together. And some of the pictures I then put in picture frames so that you start to sink into that despair that the physical body is gone. And I would look at those pictures and remind myself, but this happened and that happened. And it kind of, pulls you up. And a story with my dad, who passed just 8 months before Aaron, I told him when he went into hospice that my father-in-law had communicated with us by using numbers. Now, think about this, Brian. I had those experiences with my father-in-law.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. But I just kind of accepted them at some level, but
Right.
not really.
Right.
But not really. Because if I had, I would not have been so disoriented and so broken by Aaron's passing. So they happened, but I just kind of filed them away. Yeah?
Mm-hmm.
Then I told my dad, Alejo's dad communicated, my dad chose a number and my dad passed. And I used this book, the Tibetan Book of the Dead, and I did all these kind of different rituals with my dad. And it says about 17 days after death, a person can start to send signals. So start to pay attention. So I did. Yeah. On the 19th day, Alejo says to me, got bad news for you. I'm going to go on your walk with you, which is, he never does, not in the morning, ever, ever, ever. So we're walking along. This was in Trinidad in the West Indies.
Mm-hmm.
And I had my earphones on, and my dad's song, which was Memories Are Made of This. So, as a kid, he used to sing that to us, and he'd say 6 little kids for the flavor instead of 3. And anyway, that song was on, and Alejo tapped me on the shoulder, and he said, what daughter are you for your dad? And I said, well, baby girl number 2. And he goes, so then, Brian, he took me on this path off the sidewalk, down. We had to crawl underneath the barbed wire fence. And he showed me in this little rickety old dock, this boat that said baby girl number 2, and it had my dad's number on it.
Wow.
And I felt it.
Mm-hmm.
And later I'm like, why did he decide? So my dad didn't put the boat there. The boat was there.
Right.
But who put the idea into Alejo's head to walk with me? Which he never does.
Right.
Who convinced him to go off the sidewalk and down when you had to go through this path and on private property? So those sorts of things have happened and still continue to happen.
Yeah, and I want to just slow you down there for a minute. I want people to really absorb what this is. I mean, and again, you're kind of like I am, where it's like, okay, how did this happen? Who caused this? Let's investigate the key fob. Let's investigate this. And we investigate it, we find out we can't find a rational explanation. And there's something about, and it's great hearing other people's stories, because you realize something about the spirit world in numbers. They seem to come to us in numbers. As you said, your father chose a number.
Right.
And so I want to say to people, if you start seeing numbers on license plates, or you start to see repeating time on the clock. I know as we were doing the interview, it hit 11:11. I just happened to look at the clock when it did. That occurs with me all the time. That's my friend's number. Yeah. So, pay attention to those things. And just because we don't understand how they happen doesn't mean they don't happen. That is not a scientific point of view. People will say, well, it's not scientific because I can't rationally explain it. Yeah. We don't have to be able to explain it.
No, but we can. See, that's the whole point. We can. And I think that's key, because rational thought has many layers of meaning.
Right.
One is like this logical, based on materialism.
Right.
That's one use of rational thought. But by synchronicity, and Jung says clearly, synchronicity is always connected to numbers.
Right.
So if you need to make a model, choose a model, design a model that allows the data in. You start recording all your evidence. As you do your research, you start seeing all of these other people that have had the same experience. Yeah. And you can understand it rationally. I think that's the key.
Well, you made a good point, and I misspoke. So let me clarify that. We can't explain it from our known material models. And
exactly.
So that's when we say we can't explain it. When
exactly.
When we expand our model of the universe to include consciousness, then we can explain it. We're all connected. The material is derivative of consciousness, not the other way around.
Right.
So therefore, consciousness can have an effect on the material. And we have shown that scientifically. We've done the double slit experiment, where we can show that consciousness does have an effect. So you're absolutely right. We can explain it, but not from the point of view that we usually come from.
Not from the old model. And people think like my brother, who's, oh my gosh, he's smart as a whip. I was talking with him the other day, and I said, it's easy for us to see when we look to the past that old models didn't work and they had to expand it.
Right.
And he said, yeah, that's true when you talk about the past, but now we really do know what we're talking about.
Exactly. Well, that's what scientists said in the early 1900s. They said everything that has been discovered or can be discovered has already been discovered. Right. Let's close the patent office.
Yeah, right.
And everybody at all stages of human development has said that. And which, not to pick on your brother, but no. We think now we know. Okay, well, now we know. Now we know.
Yeah, exactly. Is it just as they knew? I remember my nephew telling me about how they used to beat sick people, like to beat the devil out of them. I'm like, oh my gosh, it's like, so it's so easy to see when we look back. And then it feels to me also very uplifting and very motivating to think about humanity, all the struggles we've gone through and all the struggles we are going through, and always it works for the good, always. That really extension of vision and enlargement of understanding is what we are about. And I don't know, it fills me sometimes like with awe and admiration for humanity.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, I think it was in your book I read this about the guy who discovered that washing hands.
Semmelweis.
Yeah. Tell people that. I think that's really important.
Okay, well now this tendency for people to not investigate beyond their beliefs it has a name. It's called the Semmelweis effect. So there's this man named Semmelweis, like in the 1800s. He's in Vienna, and he's like what maybe would be a chief resident nowadays of two different clinics. One was a midwife clinic for midwives and women to go have their babies, and the other one was a hospital where deliveries were part of what they did. So the hospital where he worked, it had a death rate incredibly higher than the midwife clinic. And so people were afraid to go into the hospital. Women were giving birth on the street, in their homes, and having a much higher survival rate than in the hospital. Mm-hmm. So what happened was he was interested in that. And then his friend was doing an autopsy of a woman who died of what they called childbed fever. So his friend was doing an autopsy. He cut himself with the scalpel, and he died of childbirth fever. Mm. So Semmelweis thought, there's a connection. Mm-hmm. And so he noticed, of course, he became aware the only place they did autopsies was in the hospital. Yeah. So he thought there's some way they're carrying something from the autopsy. They're carrying it to women, and they're infecting them somehow. So he just put this experiment for 2 months. He had people wash their hands in chlorinated lime, but I don't know what that is, but some kind of an antiseptic. The death rates decreased by, 85%. Yeah. So then he spent years researching. He did research, he documented, he researched, he documented. He published his big finding, and his colleagues refused to read it. Most of them refused to read it. Some of them said it was an insult, like doctors wash our hands for goodness sakes. Another one said, well, only God can take away somebody's life. There's no little particles. He called them cadaverous particles. There's no little particles that can kill somebody. That's God. And so if the person died, it was God's will.
Yeah.
Then he harassed them. He was so angry. And he was like, here's all this documentation. They won't read it. Then they tricked him. This group of people tricked him into inspecting a mental institute. He went to the mental institute and they locked him up. They didn't let him out. He was beaten and he died of infection. Yeah. Wow. And he was like 42 years old.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's such an important story about, and this is, you've mentioned some others before that, when you go beyond the current paradigm, people will try to literally beat you back into it.
Right.
And scientists, quote unquote, will look at something and say, well, that's impossible. There aren't these little particles floating around that are killing people.
Invisible.
But now we say, oh yeah, that's common knowledge.
Exactly.
So, and the reason why this is important is for us, people that are explorers, that are on the edge of the stuff. When someone tries to put you back in the box, when, like Gary Schwartz, I mentioned a couple of times, or Julie Beischel does scientific research, people will laugh at them. They'll ridicule them. They'll try to destroy their reputations because they're studying something that's impossible.
Right.
And we absolutely know that it's not.
I like that term pseudoscientist. I don't remember where I first came across that, but maybe that quote about like science and religion can be open-ended, growth nurturing endeavors, or they can be little neurotic defense mechanisms.
Right.
And so he used the word pseudoscientist and pseudo-religion, and I don't remember where I read that, but I like it.
Yeah, I think it's really important. So Cathy, talk about your nonprofit and where you're going with that.
Oh, okay. Well, I have Alejo and I have a foundation. It's called the Aaron Schaeffer Jensen Family Foundation, and we're doing, for example, on July 2nd, this summer is going to be our very first animated garden retreat, and that's the anniversary of his passing date, which is very significant.
Mm-hmm.
And what we're going to do is we're going to go up to this Girl Scout camp in Boone, Iowa. A group of us are going to stay all night together. And what I did before the pandemic, I used to have seminars and lectures, and because I taught English for so long, I have all kinds of different games and things you manipulate with your hands. So you're not just sitting down and having a lecture, but you're actually moving around, mixing with the other groups. And the idea of these retreats is to get people conscious of their unconscious beliefs about death. And I have these little bells so that, like those little ringing bells at a hotel or something, so if somebody gets trapped into a belief and they're asserting it as a fact when it's a theory, we have these bells so we can ring them on each other. We bing the bell, and then we can just take a step back. And that way we're hoping to not so much avoid fights, because people that are grieving and trying to find their kids, they're not interested in enough to fight about stuff, I don't think, or anyway, that's my experience. But to step back a little bit and take a look at what we're doing, what belief are we defending, and like bring that out into the open. So, and we're going to do it at no charge, because when Aaron passed and I couldn't find anything without spending a fortune. Everything was so expensive for grievers. I mean, like, I found one weekend in California, once a year, this place did a free workshop. Otherwise, I mean, it's just, so anyway, that was part of my deal. I wanted to share what I was learning in a way that people could be motivated to do their own research. That's the deal. Right. I'm not telling anybody to do anything. I'm just offering a whole bunch of resources is my idea. And also once COVID is over, I'll go back to doing like lectures. And I wanted very much to work with hospice and to try to offer an opportunity to their volunteers when people are having an experience, for them to have a background that would be useful. When my dad passed, and I went to hospice counseling in Colorado, but so my dad passed and then Aaron passed, and it was within the same year, so I had access to this counseling. And I told 3 different counselors some of the stuff that's in the book, this happened and that happened and this happened, and they were just like this. Well, yeah, they say that stuff does happen.
Yeah.
Well, kind of pat me on the back.
Top of the head. There you go.
I say, well, time will heal, and so they didn't have a clue of how to use the information I was giving them. So that hospice is an area I would really very much like to get my foot into the door. And so that's the work of the foundation, to answer your question, is to try to help by motivating people to bridge that gap between belief and knowledge.
Yeah, I think that's really, I know that's really important work. And it's interesting you talk about hospice, because I work with someone who works with a chaplain. She is a chaplain. And the thing about chaplains is they're not supposed to impose their beliefs on anybody else, right?
Right.
Which this is a time where, and you and I, again, we'd say it's not beliefs. We're trying to give people hope. We're trying to give people, there's data out there. This is not a matter of belief, and we've categorized everything you and I talk about as belief. And I love, when you and I spoke the first time, because you said I'm trying to get people beyond belief. And I'm like, that's exactly what I'm trying to do. So I know the mission that you're on, and I know Aaron is right there with you every step of the way, just like my daughter Shayna is.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And you know what? I think it's like the kids work together because people get in touch with me, and then it turns out that our kids have a lot in common. And I was going to talk about it. I have a friend who's a chaplain also in hospice. And she told me, she said, gosh, Cathy, if I had a dime, every time I had to explain the difference with an opiate-induced hallucination and a visit from grandma,
right,
I could retire. And the point I tried to make in the hospice, I went to the hospice volunteer program, hoping that maybe I could somehow talk to the volunteers. And the young women, they were beautiful, but they said just what you said. They said, no, we can't put our beliefs. But in fact, the fact that they won't allow a discussion is endorsing their belief,
right,
that it's a belief. So
right,
they're actually endorsing their own culturally imposed belief rather than opening the door to different ideas.
Yeah, absolutely, 100%. I am so excited about the work that you're doing. I think it's really awesome. So I know the book is incredible as it is, but I know you're coming out with the second edition. So tell us about that and when it's going to be available, you think?
Well, it's I decided to call it a revision because when I chatted with people about adding information, so some people told me, oh, great, because I wanted to, I wanted to hear more about that model. And I wanted this and that. But then other people said, no, it's perfect like it is. And other people said, no, it's too hard. Said, don't put anything else in there.
Yeah.
I got dizzy, So what I did was I added 3 revisions and maybe a 4th, but appendices. So the basics of the book stays the same. Okay. And in the revisions, so in the book, I had to put in the more information about synchronicity because it's key to be able to rationally process what's going on. And then my friend Donna, she's the one who convinced me to do this. This is a woman who was raised very, very, very dogmatically inside of this Lutheran Church Missouri Synod group. It's very, very strict. And so but she's a reader. And so she and I got in touch, and she told me the very first beginning, she told me, but I'm afraid it's the devil. And then she said, but now I'm afraid that I might end up where my daughter's not. And so working with her, I've decided, and so she and I went on this quite a intense reading of early Christian texts, which I had been, like you, before Aaron passed, I had read dozens of books about the Bible. Elaine Pagels, I'd read a lot. But now I started looking at really the very, very, very early texts. And I know about the Gospel of Thomas and this and that. But so with that work, and in the very beginning of this, one woman told me, she said, I think it's supposed to be for Christian groups. And Aaron told me in this dream, he wanted me to work like in a church. And so then I started thinking the very most painful belief is that you're forbidden to talk to your kids after they've died. That's the most harmful, most painful, most restrictive belief. So anyway, I added an appendix about that, and she's writing a little piece in there.
Awesome.
Because her daughter, Brian, 2 months before that young woman died of a brain aneurysm, no warning, no nothing, she posted a thing about why do we believe what we believe? And she says in there to her daughters, don't just listen to me and your dad. Don't just listen to the pastor. Don't think you know about the Bible. Read about the Bible. And 2 months later, she's gone. So what's helping her mom more than anything else? Kim, her daughter. That post left her instructions, really. So that's the difference. I've just added more information. But at the back of the book, so that people who found it just right are fine. The people who found it too soft, they're fine. And the people who found it too hard, I put in a little letter and said, please just, everything is too hard until you learn a bit more. Yeah. This book will soon become, just right, and then way too soft. And then you reach for a book that's wider. Yeah.
I tell people, we have to kind of reach beyond our grasp sometimes, so sometimes there's a book, and I've read some that are like the first time through, it's like, wow, that was a lot. And then you have to read it again. And your book, it is very almost academic, because I actually listened to it. And so there are all the footnotes. So when you get to the end of the chapter, the thing is reading off all the footnotes, but it's well documented. So for somebody who's scientifically minded, if you're like, okay, well, I don't know, I'm not just going to take Cathy's word for it. You've got to document it. So it's really great, and I encourage people to get it and to read it. And even if you don't get 100% of it, if you get 75% of it, it's a lot more than you've already got.
Well, my sister told me that one of my sisters, she read it first without looking at any of the footnotes. And she's had a lot of experiences working in hospitals. She's had a lot of experience with after-death communication. So she read it through for the stories. That's what she liked the best. And then she read it through for the footnotes. And something else I've added to the new revision is an extensive bibliography, not alphabetically, but in little groups. Like for me, the things I kept reading were about after-death communication, and then to kind of expand, that way. So that's another.
And it makes it a really great jumping off point, because I could see reading this book and then going to the bibliography and you and I talked about this earlier, because I asked you, how have you been doing since the last time we've spoken? You were so excitedly telling me about all the stuff you've been reading, and it just kind of once you get on this path, things just fall in front of you.
Right. And this is a method. It is a method of evolution of consciousness, individuation, self-transformation, inner transformation. There's so many names for it, but this is a very valid path. And where could there be more motivation? That's why it feels to me important that, because people are grieving, depending on the person, they're just more open in the very beginning. They're more open, and and then later on, there's that one quote. I don't want to use the word fool, but this is how the quote goes. When we're separated from someone we love by death, fools cry for a while and then forget, but the wise find the impulse to seek their lost loves in the heart of the eternal. Now, by that seeking the lost loves in the heart of the eternal, you change.
Right.
You, and I'm willing to bet that they change also. Yeah. Evolution of consciousness doesn't stop just because you don't have a physical body.
Yeah, we're definitely working together. Well, Cathy, any last thing you'd like to say before we close today?
No, just thank you very, very much. Thank you for your interest. And thank you for inviting me. And I really, really do appreciate it. And I just say to people out there that, it's up to you. It's up to you. They're your beliefs. You do what you want with them. But there's so much more to our whole experience. And the ones that'll be most motivated to help you are your kids or your loved ones. It could be your mom and your dad. I don't want to just say children, but it's just.
And can people still find you at mission7255.net?
Yes. Yeah. Okay. And you can order the book it's on Amazon and it's on the website. I'm the one who fulfills the orders. So I, kind of try to write a little note, and I've made friends that way too, friends that are.
And I want to get this will all be in the notes, but I like to get it on video and audio so people that don't read the notes. So the book is Finding Aaron, A Spiritual Practice Beyond Belief, and it's by Cathy Jane Jensen. Cathy Jane Jensen. It's Jensen. Again, that'll be in the notes. Cathy, really fascinating conversation. I knew it was going to be. Thanks for being here today, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much. Till the next time.
Thanks for listening to Grief to Growth. Brian hopes that you find this episode helpful and will come back for future episodes. Brian's best-selling book, Grief to Growth, Planted Not Buried, is a great resource for anyone who is coping with grief or knows someone who is. If you enjoy the podcast and would like to support it, there are 3 things you can do to help. The first is to share the podcast with someone that you think it will help. The second is to go to iTunes, rate, and review the episode. The third way you can support the podcast is by becoming a patron. Head over to www.patreon.com patreon.com/grief2growth. That's patreon.com/grief, the number 2, growth, and sign up to make a small monthly donation. Patrons get access to exclusive bonus content and knowledge that you are helping to spread the message of grief to growth. For more about Brian and Grief to Growth, visit www.grief2growth.com.
Hi there. I hope you enjoyed this latest episode of the podcast, and I'd love to hear your thoughts. What questions came up for you? What did you like about it? What didn't you like about it? I invite you to visit us at grieftogrowth.circle.so. That's grief, the number 2, growth.circle.so to continue the conversation with me and with other listeners. It's a space to sound off, to share reactions, and to go deeper into the topics from the show. I look forward to chatting more, and I hope to see you there.